Well, Mike, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So it's officially one of the greatest times of the year. You might argue the best time of the year, and wouldn't get any pushback from me on that. I love spring turkey hunting, and headed to South Texas next week. That season is underway. When does your season officially kick off?
We open next weekend, which I believe it's the 30th this year, March
Mhm.
30th here in Georgia.
Okay. And where will you be hunting?
Uh, I might go here. I probably am going to wait until um the following week when I head to Florida for a Wounded Warriors hunt that I'm doing down there, and then I'll get pretty busy from there. My wife and I are renovating a house, and
Oh,
I think my first week of turkey hunting here is going to take a hit, but uh, it is what it is.
oh yeah, yeah. Great timing on that.
Yeah, perfect. It should have been completed months ago. So we won't even go there.
So Florida, the uh the Osceola hunt is kind of the one I think is the hardest to get when people are talking about getting their turkey slam, and the outfitters are very aware of that because the prices for those hunts these days are, you could sometimes shoot a deer for less than that.
It's pretty insane. Yeah,
Hmm.
it is pretty insane.
Yeah, I have not pursued one yet. So, um, but yeah, I mean that's you got to go there to get your slam. So people are going to pay top dollar for that opportunity. Um, well, so first question I have, um, and I always hear from or through the grapevine that our state wildlife agencies actually set up the spring season to start after the peak of the breeding season. Do you believe that that is true or not?
It depends on the state.
Mm-hmm.
So many states will actually have seasons that are timed to open in some cases before peaks in breeding, and in other cases concurrent with peaks in breeding, and in some cases after, peaks in breeding. It really just depends on the state.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. I've heard that that in an attempt to prevent as many birds from being shot that they start it a little bit later than people realize. Um, why are turkeys in some regions dumber than in others? Is that solely based on hunting pressure historically, or is an eastern really smarter than a Rio or a Merriam's, in your opinion?
I think fundamentally they're all wild turkeys. I think it's just, you know, the experiences that birds have in certain landscapes. The eastern subspecies is by far the most heavily pressured,
Mm-hmm.
and they live in environments that are more forested, that are denser, that are more difficult to deal with in many cases, say versus birds that are out west that may get less pressure. They're more visible. They're dealing with habitats that might be isolated and fragmented. So for instance, you go out, I go out and hunt Merriam's every year, and it's fairly predictable on where I can find those birds.
Mm-hmm.
And once I can find them, because habitat is limited, on the landscapes that they're inhabiting in some cases. And so it's easier to locate the birds. And then once you locate the birds, they're confined to certain parts of the landscape versus say a bird here in Georgia that I get on, and he's in a densely forested environment, and he can head to pretty much any part of his home range, and in many cases he's experienced pressure from me or other hunters before,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that just translates to, more birds that have been pressured more and have dealt with hunting are more difficult to hunt.
Do you think that's a generational thing though? Like that they're inherently more keen because of what, maybe the hen experienced in rearing them, or the other toms maybe they're running with that are a year older have become wise to hunting pressure.
Well, we do see that older birds in general, birds that have experienced hunting pressure before certainly have ways of navigating around it.
Mm-hmm.
Birds that are repeatedly pressured do seem to develop strategies to deal with the pressure, whether it's gobble less on the ground, whether it's gobble less overall, whether it's hunker down and deal with pressure and not move much, whether it's as soon as hunting starts, move away from areas in their range where hunters are more likely to be and head to other places. So there's no question the bird has shown us through the behavioral data we've collected that if they've experienced pressure before, when they experience it again, they realize what to do. They understand how to behave to navigate away from the risk that we impose on them
Mm-hmm.
versus say a 2-year-old bird that really hasn't experienced that. you know he may be more likely to behave a certain way because he hasn't experienced the pressure that an older bird has.
Right. And so when you talk about harvest demographics, is a 2-year-old bird what makes up the most of the harvest?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty clearly shown in
Mm-hmm.
all the data that's been collected across many studies.
Good.
2-year-olds comprise the bulk of the harvest. And if you kind of think about that model hinges on us producing young turkeys because we have to produce young birds that become jakes, and then those jakes have to live to be 2-year-olds for those 2-year-olds to comprise most of the harvest. So that model depends on us producing turkeys. And what we've also seen is that, these jakes, they're most likely to be shot when they become a 2-year-old. If they make
Right.
it, and most of them do, jake survival is very high. So
Well, I mean, most hunters aren't shooting jakes.
that's right.
Uh,
That's
I mean,
right.
I have. The first turkey I shot was a jake. Actually, it was 3 of them with one shot, but I didn't know what I was doing. Luckily, we have 4 tags in Texas, but I don't think I've shot a jake since then. I was like, cool, I got a turkey, and I think in first time hunters and like I was then, and youth hunters, like there's absolutely no shame in shooting a jake. And even if you aren't if you're a seasoned hunter, you're like, my season has sucked and I want to shoot a turkey, fine, shoot one. I don't care.
Yeah,
Um,
as long as it's within the legal frameworks of where you are.
mhm.
We just published this work recently using a huge data set of GPS and marked birds and leg-banded birds, and we found that Jake harvest is very low across the South, very
Mhm.
low. Single-digit percentages of Jakes are being taken by hunters, and I think what you've seen in the turkey hunting world over the past few decades is just a shift, where
Mhm.
a lot of hunters are, as the popularity of the sports increased, and a lot of hunters, say my age, that have been hunting for 40 years, we're just
Mhm.
less apt. Many of us, not all, but many of us are just less apt to take a Jake
Right.
because we've gotten down the road of realizing how incredibly visceral it is to deal with a bird that's gobbling and strutting and doing his thing, and so we seek that experience versus say just harvesting a jake when we can.
I will say though, some of the funniest interactions I've had with turkeys over, I think I've been hunting them maybe 15 years, have been from jakes. Just the crazy things that they do, how stupid they often can appear. Or you shoot a tom and here comes a flock of 8 jakes that just strolled through your decoys, and you casually let them walk by, and you shoot a tom that's following them up, and then all of a sudden they run back and are just trying to whip its carcass
Oh
essentially.
yeah, yeah.
They do some funny and crazy stuff for sure. Um, well, once you locate a roost, how close is too close to set up on those birds, or do they travel so much this time of year that I don't know, maybe that's not something that you really consider?
Uh, it that depends to some degree on where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hunting here locally, you know, what we're seeing with Easterns is, well, one, there's a lot of variation in how many roost sites a tom may be using during the spring, but most of the Easterns that we've tracked are using multiple roost sites,
Uh-huh.
a handful or more during the spring. And they may hang out at one roost for a night or two and then go somewhere else for a couple nights and then go to a third spot for a couple nights. And so we see a lot of shifting around in most toms. In some cases, we don't see that. We see certain toms that habitually, use a really small number of roosts. So I tend to, with Easterns, eh, if I don't know where they're headed,
Mm-hmm.
and in many cases, you don't know where they're headed. I'll often stay away from the. I mean, I'll get close enough to where the bird can hear me once he flies down,
Right.
and that's about the distance that I try to stay. Versus, say, if I'm hunting Rios or Merriams and I have some knowledge of where they're heading, I may get fairly close to the roost if I think I can, because they're using one or two roosts and I know that they're heading, say, east when they fly down, because that's what they typically do each day. I may try to get fairly close and get in a travel route where I think I'm going to interact with the bird, fairly
Mm-hmm.
quickly after they fly down. Um, because in some situations, and you know this, you've hunted Rios, obviously. If they get by you and you've done some scouting and you have some sense for where they may be going, you can get up and move quickly and try to get in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's easier said than done in some cases.
Well, yeah. Well, easier said than being seen a lot of the time. That's the
Yeah,
deal,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah, for sure.
yeah. um, one time, so I knew where these turkeys were roosting, and I set up in some mesquites, fairly close, like I don't know, inside 150 yards from where the big oaks were, and I was surprised when, like, here the sun comes up and literally like 12 feet up in the air in this mesquite tree, like 10 yards to my left, there's two toms that just fly down. I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. Why are they roosting in a mesquite tree when these oaks are over here? So
Hmm.
it kind of made me question what I thought I knew. Like sometimes maybe when it gets dark, they just fly up in the tree that they're closest to. I don't know.
I think, you know, birds in your area, they have very defined roost sites that they've used for generations, and they go back to those roosts repeatedly. And yes, they're typically on certain types of trees, but we also see with toms that they will not always go to the same trees. They
Mm-hmm.
may use the same general spot. So one night they may be at this roost location, but they're 50 yards away from where they were the previous time they used that roost. They may be in a in a different tree, just at the same general spot. So when you hear them, you think, okay, he's in the same spot. But well, yeah, he generally is, but he's in a different tree.
Mm.
We see that a lot with Easterns as well. And I think more so in Easterns because there may be a lot of different roost trees that are suitable at a given spot, in a dense forest than there are, say in mesquite country of South Texas or
Mm.
in some of the plains of the Midwest where you've got birds that there may only be three or four trees at a roost site that are suitable to be used. I've seen Rios and mesquite too, and I always have had to wonder what they were thinking
Right.
when they'd made the decision to fly up into that tree. And we also see some situations where birds switch trees at night.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, they may fly up in a certain spot and they're not there at daylight. They've moved. you know, several trees away. They've walked around and jumped from one tree to the next, and
Hmm.
that's not an uncommon behavior, which is interesting to me because they have really crappy night vision, but they
Yeah.
make it work.
Well, so that's interesting because one time, this was in recent memory. This was like 2 years ago. My buddy and I were uh, down on the Uteria Ranch, close to the King Ranch, and way down in South Texas, and we had our camp set up, kind of like guy had like a little carport and like had a trailer where he stored his tools, and was like, "Yeah, y'all can camp here," because we were being cheap. We didn't want to pay for lodging or anything.
Right.
Cool, we'll camp anyway. The weather's nice, and we get back to camp after dark and have no idea that there's a tom roosting in the oak tree, literally right above where we're camping. We're playing music and drinking a couple beers and carrying on and making dinner. Nothing. Go to sleep. Wake up the next morning, and he shuts the truck door, and like literally right above us, this turkey just
Hmm.
fires off. We're like, "What the? We didn't know this thing was here." And to me, I was like, "Well, clearly his night vision sucks because why would he not just fly somewhere else, right? Like
Hmm.
if we're here carrying on until 11, midnight, whatever it was, uh, that seemed really odd to me that he chose to just stay there, knowing there were humans right underneath him.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah, and I've seen that with birds out in, say, the Dakotas, in Nebraska. I hunt out there every year, and I've seen birds that they become very tolerant of ranchers and farmers at their home sites,
Mm.
and they may roost very close to the homes. And you would think that bird's going to be a joke to hunt.
Yeah.
They learn real quick the sound of that rancher's truck. They learn, you know, what's going on around that home site, and then here I come, and I'm behaving differently. I'm in a different vehicle, and they realize that the gig is up. I had a similar situation a few years ago where we pulled up into a rancher's yard to park, thinking that the birds we had seen the afternoon before would be roosted on this tree line where we had seen them fairly close to dark. I mean, and we were sitting in the truck waiting for it to get light enough to kind of step out. We think we're several hundred yards away from these birds, and we're sitting there in the truck talking when we hear like, what was it? Was that a gobble? And so I roll the window down, crack the window a little bit, and I mean it's dark, and we're in the yard, and boom, this guy fires off, and he's 50 yards from this rancher's house, and we're within eyesight of them, obviously, and so now we're in a game of sneak out of the truck and figure out what to do, and we ended up killing one of those birds later that morning, but it was away from we had to figure out where they were headed because you were not going to hunt them in that location. They knew something was wrong. And
Yeah.
I had to wonder if that wasn't a strategy those birds have had before, whether they made that decision consciously to say, we're going to roost right here where a lot of the activity is going on so we can keep tabs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we didn't end up hunting that bird. We left before the sun came up. We're like, well, maybe he'll be here tomorrow or tonight when we come back. But just found it very interesting that that's where he chose to hang out. And, let's see. What is the first thing? Say you get a new property, you're all excited about it. You're probably going to do some, um, virtual scouting first and foremost. But what is the first thing you're looking for when you acquire a new property? Or
If
when,
I'm
or you're just going
here,
with a buddy, hey, come hunt my place, let's go. And he's not a turkey hunter, and you're like, okay, I'll show you the ropes. I mean, we probably all had that happen before.
yeah, yeah, I'm looking at it from a 30,000 foot view. If I'm in this area of the world, I'm looking for hardwoods. I'm trying to find hardwoods that are going to serve as roost locations. We seed birds here in the southeast that certainly roost in pines, but we see a lot of roosting activity in hardwood areas, and we also see that toms will go and spend time in open hardwoods to strut and display. So I'm trying to find locations that, one, they may be roosting in, and two, that may offer them places where they can attract attention from hens.
Hmm.
Um, that's the first two things I'm looking for is, you know, and then thirdly, I'm like, where do I need to be able to listen without screwing up the deal here? You know,
Yeah.
how would I get into this property without alerting the birds that are possibly there from knowing I'm present?
Hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, that's pretty similar to here. It's like if you in a lot of places here don't have hardwoods, especially the further south you go. But if you find water, whether that's a
That's right.
tank or a creek, there will be usually hardwoods close to that, and then that's probably where the turkeys are going to be roosting. So pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm out in parts of Texas where I know they're going to be roosting in cottonwoods, I'm looking for cotton, where would cottonwoods be on this
Mm-hmm.
landscape?
Mm.
Yeah.
What about early season strategy? Since that's where we're at currently, let's talk calling first, and then decoys. Um, so I don't know if you're more aggressive early season or less aggressive with your calling. But just take us through your general approach when it comes to early season calling, and maybe it changes depending on what the bird's telling you. I don't know, but generally
Yeah, I
speaking.
mean, I think it largely depends on, where you're at and where the bird is in their breeding sequence. If you're in a situation where it's early in the season and you've got toms that are hanging around with hens, you may have several toms that are together, and they may have a group of hens with them that they're courting. Obviously those birds can be difficult to hunt versus on the other side of this property where that group is not. There's a pair of toms that are by themselves that are in that area. Um, if it's super early and they have hens with them, my strategy is I tend to try to figure out where the birds want to be
Uh-huh.
once they hit the ground. And sometimes, again, that's easier said than done. Whereas later in the season, once the breeding season is in full gear and some breeding has been completed, toms get super aggressive late as the breeding season progresses, because they're running out of time, and
Mm.
they become more responsive in a lot of ways. And that's when I'll tend to be more aggressive at that point, because I know that I can,
Right.
because and certain birds are going to react a certain way, because time's running out and the breeding season's getting long.
So how much calling is too much? And like say it's late in the season, and I had this happen to me last year on my deer lease. I've got this bird talking to me every time I make a little hen per clock. What, it didn't really matter. He was firing off, responding to everything, and he was inside 200 yards, no doubt about it. But I could never get him to come closer, and I was like, but I think he's close enough. If I get up and move, he's gonna see me. I think.
Hmm.
Um, and it played this game for like an hour, and I never did see that bird. Might have been longer than an hour, but it seemed like forever. And he was every time I would talk, he'd respond, but he would never come closer. Maybe he was hung up with a hen. I don't know, but he didn't like something. Um,
Yeah, in
and
his
I felt
world,
like I was
you
calling
were
a lot.
yeah, in his world, you were supposed to go to him,
Mm-hmm.
and or he thought he should be able to see you.
Yeah.
And you know, it, this is
I had my
funny.
decoys out in the middle in the open though, and I'm hugging I'm under a cedar tree. It's like there's no way he saw me, but he had to have seen my decoys. So I was like, this is a slam dunk. This guy's coming in. That was one of the, and we all have these experiences that they make us scratch our heads. And that was one just from last season. And I was like, I should have killed that bird. I don't know what went wrong, but I don't
Well,
know.
think about it this way. He's standing there he's calling to you, and in his world, you're supposed to go to him.
Right.
And he keeps hearing the same sound come from the same stationary spot. And he's looking at this decoy, and there's no movement. There's nothing going on. And in his world, the hen should be mobile. She should be moving around. And some of the old pioneers in the turkey world wrote about this years ago, that you know that in their mind that should pique their skepticism, that you have this sound keeps coming from the same place over and over and over, and no hen stands in the same spot and calls repeatedly.
Right.
And so very likely that bird had dealt with pressure before, and he knew to be skeptical of that sound, and that decoy, regardless of what the decoy looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the same thing, and you're asking the question of a guy. I don't call much.
Mm-hmm.
I As soon as I realize a bird knows who that I'm there and he's responded to me, I go into very, very quiet mode. I tend to very call very little, um, particularly if I know he's coming. If I
Right.
know he's coming, I'm more apt to shut up and just sit there and let him play his hand as to where, hey, he's coming to my right, or he's coming, he acts like he's going to loop around me. Well, way before he gets here, I'm going to shift around to the right side of the tree, and just stay quiet and let him come, because he's coming. He doesn't need me to keep telling him where I'm at. He knows.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, and I think we've all, anyone that's turkey hunted more than a little bit has probably been caught with their pants down when the tom just comes in quiet.
Oh
And
yeah.
you're like,
Yeah.
oh, and like you said, you shifted to this side of the tree. Well, he comes in quiet, and you're on the wrong side of the tree, and you're like, oh, how cute,
Yeah.
drop, you win. I can't. As soon as now he's going to see you move, and he's gone. Uh, yeah, I've had that happen quite a few times. Um, and you think these birds are so stupid, and they catch you like that, just unaware.
I
It
think it's
happens.
hilarious when that, and it is frustrating, but it is, I think it's funny when that
Yeah.
happens. Even and to me, I think it's funny, and I openly laugh about it, because we have all these tools, and we have all this, we have the best camouflage, and we try to sound like a bird, and we do all these things stealth, and we're super, super still. We don't move, and then suddenly he's 10 yards behind you. You never heard him get there. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know how he made it there. And he tells you the gig is up, and he walks off. And it's
Yeah.
just hilarious to me that they do that. And they're so accomplished at it. Certain
Uh-huh.
birds are just so accomplished at it.
Oh yeah. Um, Talk about nesting success. Obviously, this differs depending on from region to region. Um, but what is a good nesting success rate? And you have to think, okay, this is the time of the year where hens are on the ground more often than, I mean, more than any other time of the year. So they've got to be more prone to predation themselves. Um, but I don't know, as far as carrying capacity and population trends go, what is an ideal nesting success rate?
That really depends on your hen survival rates and a number of other factors. But what we've largely thought through time, and what data has suggested, is if we can stay north of about 30%
Mm-hmm.
nest success, meaning, more than 30% of your nest are hatching poults each year, that we'd be sustainable at least. Now we're in your area, Rios are largely precipitation driven, which Easterns are not. And what I mean by that is, when you have a wet winter, and your spring, your birds, you get a good green up, you get a flush, super green spring. Rios will tend to be boom and bust when that happens. You'll get much higher nest success in that year when you've got, a succulent green spring ahead of you versus a super dry spring where birds are coming out of the winter in poor condition. Things don't green up. There's not as much nesting habitat. So in Rios, you tend to see a year where nest success is very poor, very poor. And then suddenly you get the right precipitation conditions and you get super high nest success. And then that slug of birds, if you will, carries the population for, until you get that type of year again.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've seen in some areas of Rio range recently, and this, is, we've had some extended droughts in some areas and
Oh yeah.
populations have declined quite a bit, and partially in response to that because there's been very low productivity. But all things being equal, Rios tend to be more linked to precipitation than say Easterns are.
Yeah, it's I don't know that it's on the scale, the boomer bust scale like our bobwhite quail, but it's certainly like you said. There's years where we're like, man, we have a lot of 2-year-olds, but we don't have any Jakes.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And that's
and
what you're seeing. That's exactly what you're seeing.
yeah. Um, there was something that I wanted to ask you that I just lost my train of thought there. What we were just talking about, but maybe I'll come back to that. Thoughts on reaping? This is the controversial topic of the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, it seems like, and a lot of folks. We had, I think his name's Cameron Weddington on last year to talk about this, and he's very opposed to reaping. He says it's too efficient. We
Hmm.
kill a bird's too easy. I've only tried it a couple times and have not had success with it. Um, but where are you at on the practice of reaping?
I think first and foremost, it creates a safety issue. That's one thing that jumps up in my head, and I know a lot of agencies are looking at the practice in that way, that you're taking a part or a part of a male wild turkey that we are seeking as hunters, or a fabrication of that, a fake fan, if you will, or part of a decoy that simulates a fan, and you're simulating a behavior that hunters are identifying to shoot. So the safety issue is one thing that pops to my head. You know, I've I'm not a I'm not a guy that uses reaping or fanning myself. I have, and I've actually done it intentionally in some situations because I wanted to see how the bird
Right.
reacted. Um, and I've seen situations where the bird ran the other way, and I've seen situations where he damn near ran over top of me to get to where I was. And um, I do think in some situations it creates a circumstance where the bird is is incapable mentally of turning off the trigger that you've pulled. No, no
Right.
pun intended. When when they see that fan, they they're reacting in a way that isn't, you can't turn it off. And that to me is compelling because, and you probably, people have seen this, you see it on social media all the time. I've seen it with my own
I
two
think
eyes.
social media is part of the reason why we've seen this craze. It's like, well, how many views can I get if I shoot a turkey in the face at 5 feet?
Yeah.
A
Yeah, and
lot.
it's such a polarizing topic too, because what it does is it offers up opportunities for hunters to disagree with each other.
Hmm.
And that's never although I understand the disagreement, I get it. it doesn't really offer up any positives to argue with one another about a technique, um, but their inability to turn it off is something that causes me pause because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
the bird gets there, and it's no different in some ways that you know you have a group of birds, toms come in together, and you shoot one, and everybody gangs up, pummeling the bird that you just dropped.
Right.
You know that's a similar
Sometimes
trick.
it's his best friend. He's like, "Oh, we're just hanging out. We're friends." And then you shoot one of them, and then the other guy walks 10 yards away and then comes back and tries to kill him again.
Yeah, and
Like,
what that is
thought you were
they were never
buddies.
friends. They tolerated each other
Uh-huh.
socially, and then when you drop that bird, his quote unquote buddy now sees an opportunity to move up on the social hierarchy and become dominant, and therefore he jumps on that down bird, and that's what you're seeing. You
Yeah.
know, you're seeing something that is triggered so quickly. Yeah, that social dominance has been part of their lives since they were poults. And now suddenly this guy that I've been hanging out with, I see a chance because he's weak. He's on the ground. He's down. They don't know why he's down. They don't know
Yeah.
that a shotgun just went off. They just see that he's down. And therefore it triggers that response that's visceral to them. And and in some cases you may have seen this yourself. You know, I've videoed this and have seen it numerous times. You can get up off the ground in some cases, and those birds will not react to you at all as they're
Mm-hmm.
continuing to fight the down bird. Have turned off their risk taking strategy, of avoiding risk, and
Yeah.
now they're solely focused on this social hierarchy and moving up. And that to me is an interesting behavior. And that's part of what I see in some cases with birds that are reacting to a strutting decoy or a fan or these other tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah. Well, and this wasn't a turkey hunting scenario, but I was in West Texas in the Panhandle and I was hunting pronghorn, and we get on this group of pronghorn feeding in this pasture, and it's a buck and I think maybe 3 or 4 does, and I get prone, I shoot him, drop him, the does take off, and none of us, there was like 3 or 4 of us, none of us knew this other buck was underneath. There's one tree. I mean, it's just flat, open Panhandle country. There's one tree. We didn't even see him in the shadows there. He's bedded down. As soon as I shot that buck, those does take off. Boom, he's up and he's now with those does, just like waiting for his opportunity. Probably,
That's pretty interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't even know it was there. And was like, wait a second, there's another buck. Oh, yeah, he just was waiting, doing his time. We did him a favor, shot his competitor, and now he's boom, he's top dog.
Yeah, he saw an opportunity.
No, animals are that's just inherently that's what they do. Um, Interesting to see though. So, but you never answered the question. You skirted it. So reaping, good, bad. Should it be legal?
Well, at the end of the day, if it
If we're killing
doesn't
too many birds, that's not if it's affecting population. We've seen kind of in the Midwest, I think some states are having a negative population trend, which is a little concerning. I don't know if reaping is effective enough to be the reason why, but maybe it could be. I don't know.
well, and there's no data to suggest that it is.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, what we need to understand is if the practice increases harvest rates, so the percentage of the toms we kill, and does it change the timing of that harvest to where, let's just say, it disproportionately increases harvest early in the breeding season. If it does not do either or both of those, then at the end of the day, it may not matter.
Mhm.
It may be simply a tool that's allowing birds to be taken that otherwise would still be taken. And that's a really hard question to answer because it requires a study design that's very difficult to create.
Mm,
What we really need to understand is if you expose a bird to this tool, is he likely to make a decision he otherwise would not have made that day? Does that make
right.
sense?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that is and then ultimately would does he would he have died on that day versus not died? And then if you use that tool across a certain segment of the population, are you more likely to harvest more of them than you otherwise would have?
Right.
That's hard to get at. And I don't know if we ever will get there.
Mm,
I think agencies, so to your question, I can't tell you if it's affecting populations because we just don't have the data
right.
to say. I think what some agencies are doing is they're looking at it from the standpoint of we don't know what it's doing at a population level, if anything, but what we do know is it creates a safety hazard.
Hmm.
We know
Well, maybe
that.
they should say no reaping on public land because, like, the places
Yep.
that I hunt here, I never would even. If you're shooting at me, you're poaching. So I don't expect you to be. I don't
Hmm.
ever fear for my safety in the few times that I've tried it.
And
And I,
there are agencies that have done that,
yeah.
that have banned the practice on public lands. And I'll take my science hat off and just put my turkey hunting hat on. I don't see an issue with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got people that are hunting public lands that don't know where other hunters are in many cases,
Mhm.
and you're banning the practice of using something that looks like a male turkey that we're trying to kill. I mean, that makes sense logically to me
Mhm. I've
as a
never
turkey
had
hunter.
the pleasure of calling in another turkey hunter, but I've called in a handful of elk hunters. So it's kind of the same situation of using vocalizations, and you're calling in other humans, and then you throw in the fact that you've got something that well, that's the difference when elk hunting, right? I don't have a life size elk right there that I'm holding next to me, but certainly with turkey, it's feasible. We can put it in our pack on our back and take it with us, and there's definitely a danger element there. I mean, somebody just got shot in Florida like last week. I think I read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I don't know if
yeah. I
that was
saw that.
reaping related or not, but they got shot, and people always get shot in the turkey woods, unfortunately. What about? And I don't know if there's any study or data out there. And I do this when I use a full strutter. I put a real turkey fan in there to add realism to it. I don't know if that's does. Do you think that little alteration of the decoy as it comes out of the package. Do you think that also can flip the switch by just putting a real fan in there, or does it
I
have to be?
honestly don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um, I
I
do
think it makes it
know.
look more real, so I do it. I don't. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. I mean, I think what you're seeing in some cases now is the decoys that are being produced are so realistic that you stand back and look at some of these decoys from a distance, and it's hard to tell that that's a decoy. I mean,
Right.
they are very realistic. But I honestly don't know if adding a real fan to the decoy matters. I have no idea.
Hmm. As we're getting close to wrapping up here, just take us through the life cycle of a tom, generally speaking.
It's a tough road being a turkey.
Uh-huh.
So they, bird hatches and they immediately are predator bait for a suite of species ranging from smaller mammals to larger mammals like bobcats and coyotes to hawks and owls and snakes. And a lot of poults that are hatched die within the first 2 weeks, but if they make it through that first 2 weeks, that's when they start roosting off of the ground. They're able to to roost above ground, and their survival increases at that point. They then typically will group together with other, so you'll have a hen with a brood of poults, and after a few weeks, they'll end up hanging out with another hen that has poults, and that's what you see in the summer. When you see these groups of 2 or 3 hens or 4 or 5 hens with a bunch of poults with them, that's these different hens that have been successful that are now in these brood flocks. Um, at that point, you get a lot of genetic mixing.
Uh-huh.
You get birds that don't know each other that are now hanging around together. They learn each other. They they develop dominance hierarchies within those brood flocks. And then those birds become the jakes we see in the fall. They will spend time in groups together, as you know. So you'll see a group of hens in the fall and winter, and they'll have a bunch of jakes with them. And then about now, or maybe here a few weeks ago, the jakes started moving away from the hens. So in other words, today you may see them, 5 jakes are hanging around with this group of 10 hens. Tomorrow they're gone. The next day they come back.
Mm.
2 days later they're gone for 3 or 4 days, and then they come back. And what they're doing is they're having to move to certain parts of the landscape because you've got hens that are breeding with toms. The toms are going to certain areas. The jakes are moving between these different areas. And this is when you'll see jakes sometimes harass toms. You may have a big bunch of jakes that are harassing a pair of toms that are trying to, court hens. They're just bullies. They're
Right.
they're just bullies. They're groups
Strength
of
in
bullies.
numbers.
Yeah, and what we see is survival of jakes is really high. So once they get to where they are right now, they're most likely to survive. And then they're going to, as soon as the spring is over, they're going to start molting and losing their feathers and replacing their feathers. They're By early summer, you're going to notice their beards are about 6 inches long. They're going to replace all their feathers, and by the middle to end of the summer, they're going to quote unquote be adults.
Mm.
They're going to become those 2-year-olds that following spring are going to be the ones that make us feel like we're Superman when it comes, or Superwoman when it comes to turkey hunting, because they're that's their first year as a breeder.
Yeah.
They're responsive to calls, and they make us feel like we know what we're doing.
Right. Right.
At
So
that
that gets
point,
them
his
to 2.
survival declines quite a bit.
Uh-huh. From hunting pressure
Yep.
primarily. Uh-huh.
Yeah, from harvest. Yep.
So what is what are they, is it 4 years old? Is that like a super mature tom? How much older can they get?
Oh, we've had birds that were recovered when they were 8 or 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
They were
Okay.
shot when they were that old. That's not typical.
I'm
Uh,
thinking the nicest birds I've shot were probably 4. Just like, oh, well, this one's got, look at the spurs on this bad boy, and he comes with a 11-inch beard. So I don't know. Maybe you can have a 2-year-old that sports those features, but I just would always assume, hey, this is probably a more mature bird.
yeah, what we see is that in in heavily hunted populations, getting a bird to say age 4 or 5 is quite a feat.
Mm.
Um, it happens, certainly it happens, but if you kind of look at our band returns, meaning banded birds we banded as jakes, so we knew exactly how old they were when we put the band on. Most of them, if they're going to be harvested, are harvested when they're 2. And then you see this decreasing return rate as they're 3 and 4 and 5. And what's happening there is, one, there are fewer, many of them have already been harvested, so they can't be 3 or 4 or 5 years old. But in some
Right.
cases, they're just not being shot. as like some of these things we've talked about, as they learn, as they gain more experience, they become more difficult to harvest. And so some of them are simply dying of old age. Um, Life catches up to them at some point. The more springs you go through, the more likely you are to be killed by natural predators, which we see every year. We see toms that are killed by coyotes and bobcats and great horned owls and golden eagles and things like that. So, I mean, just the law of averages, once you get to be 4, 5, 6 years old,
Mm.
you know, your your lifespan is running out because you're behaving in a way during the spring that predisposes you to being killed, right? I mean,
Right.
you're gobbling, you're strutting, you're acting stupid, you're doing these things that attract attention, not just from us, but from predators that are natural in the environment.
Mm. I saw you mentioned hawks. I saw, which I think I've read articles about the owls taking mature birds off the roost at night.
Yes.
Um, but I have seen in broad daylight, it was a white shouldered hawk, which is native to South Texas and Mexico. This was down there by the King Ranch. And I'm looking from the patio of the ranch house, and I'm watching this hen just work her way across the field. And all of a sudden, I see this bird of prey, and I didn't know what bird it was at the time, come down and attack it. Didn't kill it, but it ripped most of its fan out, and then the hen ran off and got away.
Mm-hmm.
But I went and got the binos and saw where this bird had landed, and was like, "Oh, I don't know what kind of bird that is." I looked it up; it was a white-shouldered hawk, about the size of a red-tailed hawk,
Mm-hmm.
and that hen was twice its size. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't realize that, even an adult turkey is fair game to a average or larger hawk, I guess. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
And,
was eye
and I mean,
opening.
you look at like a great horned owl, they kill toms, on the roost site. I've discussed this on other podcasts and we've published data showing it. You know, a horned owl is not the size of you got a 20 something pound tom,
Mm-hmm.
but that owl is, if you think about it, the turkey has no idea that owl is coming,
Right.
and that owl hits with just ferocity, and rides the bird to the ground and often removes its head. They remove the head.
Uh-huh.
So you got this proportionately much smaller bird, but they have the element of surprise, and they have mechanisms to deal with larger prey that they kill. And it is, I've seen hawks attack birds too, and it is interesting when you kind of look at the differences in body size.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing I want to ask you is what do you, and I'm not knocking it, but I've never done it because to me it's boring. I do enough deer hunting where I'm sitting stationary, but I see people that bow hunt turkeys and they're sitting in a blind and they know the turkeys are using the same route every day and they're, usually it's in a corn stubble or something else, more more likely probably in the Midwest. But do you ever just sit there and I just call it deer hunting for turkeys? Like I know they're coming. It might take all day, but I'm going to sit here in this blind or under this one tree. I'm just going to wait it out.
No, I don't do that. I don't sit in blinds at all, but
Mm-hmm.
now I will find a spot, particularly in the afternoons. If I know birds are in the area,
Mm-hmm.
I will often, I say often, depending on the circumstances, I may perch up somewhere where I think once the action heats up, I'm close enough to where I can get in on it. Once he picks up gobbling, or sometimes I'm a pretty patient guy. And particularly if I have my turkey chair with me, my little chair where
Yeah.
I can sit comfortably, I do a lot of thinking in situations like that, and it allows me to unplug. So I'm apt to just sit and blind call,
Uh-huh.
in the afternoons quite a bit, um, and just kind of hang out until the action gets going, to where, okay, I just heard a bird. He's 300 yards to the east. Now I'll get up and go, that type of thing. But no, I'm not a sit in the blind guy.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither. I like to run and gun. Uh, and I think, you get busted a lot doing that, but it's fun for me. Yeah, I like being mobile and part of in the game. I feel like I'm always in the game if I'm moving around. Um, does barometric pressure affect when they gobble?
It we do see relationships between barometric pressure and the the predicted probability that gobbling would be higher or lower.
Mm-hmm.
So in what I mean by that is, if barometric pressure is rising relative to what it was the day before, then we do see more gobbling activity.
Okay.
And that shouldn't be as a surprise to people. I mean, typically in that what's going on in that scenario is a weather system has passed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're seeing improving weather over the day before. And that would be the yesterday was kind of cruddy and windy, and today the pressure's rising, things are calming down. No, not rocket science there. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we see that as turkey hunters.
Right. Well, I just wanted to say also, I know your son was tragically taken. I don't maybe a couple years back now, but I enjoy how you honor him. You go deer hunting with his rifle. You're doing it for Austin. I think you have a found. Did you start a foundation for him as well in his
I
honor?
did. I did.
Okay.
I started, it's the Austin Hunter Chamberlain Memorial Foundation.
Okay.
If you go to austonsway.org, you can find that's the website for the foundation. And I'm doing mentored hunts, which Austin was passionate about. And we're doing some archery competitions and tournaments and to honor his legacy. And yeah, it's been uh, healing while being very difficult, of course.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I cried when I saw the post. I might cry now, but as a father of a son, I just can't even imagine. Um, so I enjoy how you honor that.
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I just can't imagine. But so okay, the website one more time.
austonsway.org.
Okay, and what is
Um,
that? What is that? It's for mentor hunts.
yeah, what we're doing is I'm identifying these small groups of young people, say 18 to 25,
Mm,
and putting them in situations where they're repeatedly mentored, not taking them on their first hunt or and then never seeing them again. I'm
right.
repeatedly, and we're just getting going with this. I want to repeatedly put them in situations where they can be around accomplished, successful land managers, biologists, people that are passionate about hunting and land management from a diverse array of backgrounds, because that's what Austin did. He went everywhere, everywhere I was, he was there. So
Right.
he got to interact with people, people from I have nothing but a high school education, but I'm really good at my job, to a neuroscientist. Yeah, and he learned from all of those people. And what I have seen is that if you put young people in positions where they can learn from accomplished, successful people that have done it, that have
Yeah.
been there and done whatever it is, whether it's planning a food plot the right way, whether it's managing a duck impoundment the right way, whatever it is. If you put them in situations where they can get scientific based information, people that have done it and have done it the right way,
Mm-hmm.
they will take that information back to where they live and they will talk about it. They'll show other people, they'll talk to other people. And what you've done is you've created a situation where a young person has a contact. They know they can call Joe and get information about planning rates. They know they can call Mike and understand information about archery equipment. They can call whoever it is and they can get
Mm,
sound information about the topic they're interested in.
mm,
And they'll do that. They'll rely less on narratives on the internet and they'll rely more on people that they trust.
mm.
But what it takes is putting them in situations where they can meet those people and they can establish that bond. And that's what I'm going to do.
I love that, and because I think, and there's so many great organizations that take a kid hunting for the first time. But if that kid's parents don't hunt, then a lot of times the stats show that that kid went hunting and then he
That's
liked
right.
it, but he never went again, and he falls through the cracks. He's like, I really enjoyed that. I would do it again, but then the opportunity never came, and they just didn't. They didn't join our ranks for permanently.
Yep. And
So.
that's what I want to, what we're doing through the foundation and the board members, we're identifying people, young people who are already hunters.
Mhm.
They're already passionate about what they do. What they've lacked thus far is the opportunity to become stewards and not just hunters.
Right.
And in so doing, you learn more about the animals that you're hunting. You learn how to manage the landscape for them. You develop contacts, you develop friendships, and you become a steward. And by default, you become a better hunter. You become more
Mhm.
accomplished. You become more passionate because you're, to coin a mossy oak example, you're a gamekeeper. You become part of the management and the conservation of this animal rather than just being a consumptive user. And that's the model that my kids have followed from the time they were little bitties. So that's not to knock on the take a kid hunting one time, but
Right. No.
I want to take a different model, and that's
Yeah.
that's what the foundation's doing.
Oh, that one's important too. I mean,
Oh, for
you got to
sure,
plant the seed,
absolutely.
but it just like the more we do it, the more we realize, okay, well, then what's next, right?
Yes,
There has to be something after that.
yes,
Um, well, awesome stuff. Your Instagram page, very popular. If you guys are into turkey hunting or just outdoor knowledge in general, habitat management, I suggest giving Mike a follow. I think it's Wild Turkey Doc.
that's right. Wild turkey, DOC, all one
Um,
word.
well, man, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time. Always enjoy catching up, and I hope that you have a great season.
Sure, man. Same to you.
All right, take care, Mike.
Yep. See you.